Welcome, Shie Bastida and Alexandria Villasenor. Well, let's talk just for a minute before we move on to when you were both in lockdown, talk a little bit about what it was like for you as climate activists to all of a sudden take a breather and know that the rest of the world was taking a breather with you. I mean, I've heard numbers on the magnitude of, maybe 30% less carbon was burned for 3 months. And I know that wild animals were coming into cities and the national parks and everything the earth kind of like perked up and got happy, and birds were singing just a little bit longer and sweeter as an example around. How was that for you?
I mean, for me, I actually went to Massachusetts because for quarantine for a month because things were really, really bad in New York. You felt like you couldn't open the window because COVID was gonna get inside. Like it just felt like it was everywhere. It was this situation of kind of like crisis, and I think that going through that, it made me feel like other people understood what a lot of times youth climate activists feel. That there is this crisis going on, and there's something that, it's getting worse. And that's kind of what the pandemic felt like. So if you ever want to know what climate grief is, it's like being really scared about COVID. And I do think the earth got a breather, but and I've said this for the last 6 months, we have to be really careful about saying that, because then we're saying, oh, it's because of humanity that the earth is like, if humanity stops, then the earth is clean. And the truth is that we can have a functioning, running society and a clean earth at the same time. So we don't have to all lock in and not do anything and then the earth is fine. We actually have to work to just get the fossil fuel industry out of business, to get the fossil fuel industry, to stop it from burning the fossil fuels, which are actually producing all the contamination and pollution. So that's what I want people to take away from it, that it's not us that are creating the problem. Is like 100 companies who produce 71% of greenhouse gases. Is the fossil fuel industry who keeps contaminating our water, our air, our food, our oceans. And we can live in a world where we're all doing our best and going out um, with clean air. And I think that COVID-19 kind of helped us imagine what that world would look like, um, and that is possible without a global pandemic. So that's kind of what I want people to take away from it.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I had been planning on taking a break actually because I had traveled constantly for months because of activism. So then all of a sudden I had a break, and it was one that I didn't plan. So it definitely caught me off guard for a little while. And then I realized that I just missed people, and I wanted to focus on the friendships, I'd made in the movement, and just talk to people and be together, even though we weren't doing any work together at all. And so I definitely value more of the people that I've met throughout this now. And it took me a while to get my activism redirected to a more virtual space. And then things really started to take off again. There's a lot of live streams, virtual panels, and conferences, and organizing on social media, like what we did with TikTok surrounding the Tulsa rally. I've learned activism can be taken in different ways. And so definitely this is not something that I would have anticipated doing work online. And so I do miss seeing everyone in person, but I know that there is going to be ways that we take action now that are going to be different than before. And so this time has definitely taught us that we have the resources to take action that we need. We've seen this global response to a pandemic. Why can't we do that with climate change?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So here we are, I guess it's October the 16th, right? And we're less than 3 weeks away from the general election. And you both have had each of the experiences that you've had throughout the summer. Before we end on the election, maybe is there any highlights that you'd like to bring up that have happened over the summer? I mean, Shia, I know that you've gotten to know Jane Fonda as an example, and you did a TED Talk, and maybe Alexandra, you have some things to add also.
Yeah, so during the summertime, there was definitely a lot of organizing for getting out the vote, of course. So this has been happening for quite a while. I ended up at the beginning when this election was during the first debates in Florida. I actually was working closely with the Jay Inslee campaign, and so I was really pushing the climate policies there. And so I was very excited when Biden ended up adopting Jay Inslee's plan. And so I've since become a Biden surrogate doing fundraisers, panels, and op-eds with his team, which has been really educational for me, learning how the whole process goes. And so because I am only 15, I won't be able to vote, sadly, in this election. I have been doing everything I can, though, to talk from this perspective of the action we need to take, because we can't wait 4 more years to take action, because by then it will be far too late. And so this is a very important election, and it's sadly one that a lot of young people who have opinions can't actually participate in that way. And so I ended up speaking at the Democratic National Convention, which brought climate really into the mainstream, because previously climate change hasn't been a big part of the convention. And so now climate change is becoming a very important voter issue for young people. And so that's one thing that I've been focusing on since the summer, and I'm going to continue on focusing on until November. And every once in a while, when I do think about how close the election is, I do have a tiny existential crisis, but I know that there's going to be a lot of organizing and youth organizing around it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I was so happy to see you at the DNC speaking. It was like, yes, we're there, we made it. And for me, the summer was actually crazy. I wish I had done more in terms of climate, but I actually had to go to Mexico because the Trump administration terminated visas for workers. So, like, my family and I we had to leave right away. And I was able to get a student visa. And so I've been living here in New York City by myself for the past 2 months, which has been a huge opportunity for growth for me, because I not only have to focus on my
It's
first
6
year.
o'clock.
Oh, sorry. I not only have to focus on my first year of college, but also on organizing and also on taking care of myself. And that, I think that's one of the things that I've learned this summer and this like first half of my first semester, is that we have to take care of ourselves to take care of the outside world. If we're not fine, if our families are not fine, if our friends are not fine, then it's harder for us to actually go out there and make that positive change. So for me, it's more of like a reflection period. I did had to self-record my TED Talk, which is one of the weirdest experiences ever. They send you all this equipment and you have to set up your own lights and record with your phone. So I think we've come a long way in creativity and innovation that obviously has to be applied not only for making this type of conferences and events available, but everything that goes with innovation. So yeah, that's how my summer was, and I'm grateful I got to see my grandparents, but I do wish I had done more for the climate movement and voting, which we are starting to focus on Re-Earth Initiative, for sure.
Well, on that note, I would like to say that when you both took the stage with Leonardo DiCaprio, I believe the numbers were about 60,000 live people and maybe I think 10 million watched on the MSNBC. So already you're helping to elevate, the conversation, even with those small sound bites. And then I've also heard that, Shie, when you did your TED Talks and when you let it go, they released it on the 21st. I think you've already had 750,000 views. And Alexandria, I know that the numbers for viewers watching Democratic National Convention. I heard was 60 million plus Americans. So, I just want to thank you both for getting, to being willing to step out in front and elevate this conversation so that millions and millions and millions of people are looking, they're listening, they're reading, they're hearing what you're saying. And so, I, for one, am just deeply, deeply grateful for your leadership. And so now maybe we can just turn up to today, and maybe we can just talk about what a great experience it was for both of you, and for me certainly, to share a few minutes with Tom Steyer and Senator Ed Markey.
I, first of all, just loved being able to hear more from Tom Steyer and Ed Markey. Just seeing everything that they have done around climate, I think is very important to show other politicians that, yes, it is politically possible. And it's definitely inspiring. And I was very excited to be able to see Shea again, too, because we haven't been able to see each other in a conference for a while. So it was great to be able to see her again. And so I'm very glad that you're back in New York City too. So next time I'm there, I can see you this time.
Yeah, it was awesome to, Ed Markey is such an icon in the youth climate movement. I feel like he's one of the few people, along with like, I don't know, Christiana Figueres or AOC, who we actually say these adults are doing amazing and we want to support that. So I'm really happy that we got the opportunity to have the conversation, as well as with Tom, who ran on a climate platform when he ran for president. And I was happy to support him. Like when Jay Inslee dropped out, Tom was the next climate candidate, and then Elizabeth Warren was after. So I think that we are getting this wave of people who are actually willing to put the climate crisis and climate solutions as something that has to be done because there's no other way to move forward. And that's the type of thinking that we need, and that's the type of politics that we need. And it is a political issue because it affects every aspect of our lives, and it's also a corporate issue, and it's also an individual issue, and it's an immigrant issue. It's all types of issues, so we need all types of approaches. So yeah, and I'm also happy to also see you, Alexandria. I hope we can strike together soon again.
You guys are from a very, very, very specific group, club, if you will, the Climate Club. Okay, great. Well, that's wonderful. So I'd like to finish this talk with going forward and looking, obviously, we're all looking very nervously at November 3rd and what's happening in our country. They're trying to put a new judge on the Supreme Court. Tragically, we lost Ruth Bader Ginsburg a month ago. And maybe you could talk a little bit about what it looks like going forward for the next 3 weeks.
Well, I feel like when you say that, I was like, what's in 3 weeks? And then it hits me every time that it's the elections. So, I mean, first with the Supreme Court, I just want to reiterate how important that position is right now, because if Justice Barrett gets confirmed, then the court is going to have a majority of conservative justices who, don't have a record of doing anything for climate legislation. And so it's super important that just a judge who's going to be there for the rest of their lives, especially when we're entering one of the most critical time periods in humanity's history, at least has the decency to say, the climate crisis is an issue that I want to prioritize, and I want kids to look up to me as a judge and say, they did the right thing, and I'm glad we confirmed them. So I really want to be specific about this, we have to wait until after the election to confirm a judge. And I hope that really happens. I think that's my hope for the next 3 weeks, that we don't rush into doing that, and that obviously the youth vote turns out.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, this is a very interesting area that we're in right now and seeing everything come together. I'm actually hearing a lot of talk from other organizations right now and movements that if the election isn't handled honestly, then there's plans for a general strike. And so, which, given the current actions of this administration, is a real possibility. And I think that it's something that we have to be prepared for, not just to hold the election process accountable, but to defend democracy, because democracy is on the ballot. So this is going to be very interesting seeing what happens within just the next month.
Truly, truly. Do you have any concrete plans about how you plan to use your platforms, organizations, to actually engage the millennial vote demographic, the Generation Z that you're both part of, that are the upper part that can have come of age, that can vote, but also women. We haven't really touched on women, and that's such an important demographic of voters this this election.
Yeah, that's a very important area. My family. I have siblings who are millennials, and then I'm Gen Z, and so I always, talk to them, and they're just like, "What are y'all doing on TikTok now?" So that's always really fun to hear. But I'm really focusing on, for this election, continuously to talk about and organize on social media, like we talked about in the last discussion. I think that social media is going to be a very important area for Gen Z, millennials, especially, and TikTok. There's, Broadway for Biden. There's TikTokers for Biden. There's so many groups that have now formed, and especially when it comes to women, one thing I always talk about as well is that women are also going to be impacted by the climate crisis, because they're the in areas, they're the first responders in families. And so I see a lot of women leading the climate movement. And so that's going to be very important, is women are going to be leading this effort as well, with activists and other areas.
Yeah, and just on that last point, I really want to point out All We Can Save, that is just behind Alexandria, which is an amazing anthology of essays by women climate leaders. And I think that if you have any questions about the movement or the intersectionalities or the policy or the science, you can probably find it in that book. And it's over 400 pages, so it's definitely worth everything, every single last penny, I think. I actually bought that book with my own money, which is awesome, because I think that's the first book I've ever bought with my own money that my parents didn't buy for me. So it also felt amazing to be able to do that. And there you can see that, the feminist climate solutions are so important for moving forward. And it's just that thinking as well of being more centered, being more assertive, being more innovative, that's also gonna push us forward. In terms of like actual youth and millennials, I really don't have that many relationships with millennials. It's either like Gen Z or old people. Like there's no like in between. I feel like I'm always like have that gap. So I do know a few like activists who are millennials who are really mobilizing. So I make sure that I support them. But I really don't know how to talk to millennials that much, except for just do more of what Gen Z is doing in terms of activism, because Gen Z really has that activism spirit, and I don't think millennials have it. So I really want millennials to feel like they can empower themselves and do that as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to that. All of my siblings are millennials, actually, and they're in the demographic right now that that is losing their jobs, and they're being hit economically right now. And so I see them organizing and rising up as well, just because a lot of it depends on this, and they're rising up just like Gen Z.
Yeah.
Mm.
And a lot of organizers actually who were younger like 5 years ago are millennials now. So like majority of Sunrise Movement are like late Gen Z or millennials, which is awesome to see. So there's definitely a lot of possibility there, and there's a lot of excitement there as well, that I think we have to do more effort as Gen Z to really come together with millennials as well.
Well, I'd like to point out that the book behind you, All We Can Save, I think features essays by both of you. And so I also am a proud owner of one of the early copies, rushed out and got it at Borders or someplace. And so thank you both for contributing to Catherine Wilkinson's fantastic book that she wrote with the other ladies. And so just to conclude this sort of timeline interview, I want to just say thank you both for your continued leadership in the world, influencing as best you can the intelligence of a renewable energy, a clean technology future that's based on water and wind and solar and all of the organic indigenous technologies or systems of the planet. We didn't really get to touch on too much of the indigenosity, and maybe we do need to include that, Xie, before we end, because I think it's so important to remember that the indigenous people of the planet, they live on the front lines of the remaining biodiversity all around the world that's being continuously eroded and encroached upon, and that of course is the home of all the animals and the plants. And so maybe let's talk a little bit about that before we end.
Yeah, of course. So I just think that recently I think indigenous people have been more recognized than I've seen my entire life, and I think my dad has seen his entire life, and probably before that. Right now we are centering indigenous rights in a lot of our discourse, a lot of our conversations, and that's super important, because it's not only about like us as activists, I think, and people in general embodying a lot of that indigenous thinking, that is circular economy, it's reciprocity, it's balance with mother nature, but it's also about protecting the people who hold that knowledge, protecting the people who are taking care of 80% of the biodiversity around the world. It's about protecting the rights, the human rights of people who have been stripped away of their land, of their culture, psychologically and physically targeted by the fossil fuel industry. That's what's important right now. And it's important that we are actually putting all of these facts and these voices in the front lines. I just wrote a paper on fracking and indigenous communities, and the amount of physical and psychological damage that these communities endure is, should not be allowed for any community. So I think that that conversation is really growing and amplifying, and I see a lot of intersectional activism highlight indigenous voices more than I've seen since I started my activism.
Yeah, I would also want to add, specifically in California, indigenous peoples have managed the forests with fire and controlled burns. And it was actually colonialism that came in and started this trend of fire suppression, which has also contributed to the extreme fire season that we've seen this year. And so now the state of California is re-engaging our indigenous communities to learn the historical knowledge of managing fires in order to take care of our forests. So it is hopeful to see this shift with indigenous knowledge being respected.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for touching on that. Well, I think I'd like to offer you both some concluding remarks if you'd like to both say, but I just want to thank you once again for your continued leadership. It's never been more important than now. So with that, I would give you both the concluding remarks.
Yeah, I think that this year is definitely going to be a learning and growing experience, and there's going to be a lot of actions. You know, thank you for having me on this panel with wonderful people like Shie and Tom Steyer and Ed Markey. And so I think that, you know, this year is just going to be a very important year and important election, and now is the time to really be an activist.
Yeah, thank you as well for having us today, because sometimes, most times, I find all of these panels really, necessary not only for whoever's watching, thank you for watching, but also for us, because it's an opportunity for us to talk about what's going on in the movement, share that knowledge, talk about how we are dealing with the effects of the pandemic and the climate crisis. So it's a really good opportunity to connect. And I think we should have more, not only panels, but just more opportunities to connect with others. And I think that this is really has been really empowering. Just to really recap what has happened in the past year and a half, because I don't usually sit down and think about it. It's just moving forward, and I think it's important to also look back and be proud of the things that we have accomplished, and know that we have to keep going and empower other people so we can accomplish our goals.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today to recount the past year and a half. And I look forward to what great things are going to come in the next year and a half, working alongside both of you and the rest of the climate activist community in order to encourage the Green New Deal and the hopefully future President Biden's climate plan, and maybe there will be a climate core, I understand, and many other things that are going to happen in order for us to turn this around. So once again, it's been wonderful spending the last hour and a half with you both. Thanks so much.